Hey everyone, this is David McBee with the Twin Lakes Sports Network. We're over at the Mid-States Wrestling Gym. Of course, we got done just doing a podcast with the Space Cowboy Jason Jones. Now we're actually getting to meet some of the wrestlers. Of course, the one and only, this is Joey Corman from up in Missouri down here doing some training.
Yes, sir. I like to come down here and work out with these guys. Jason Jones runs a top-notch school here in Harrison, Mid-States Wrestling. I like to come down here and just work out with these guys and share some of my knowledge that I picked up over the last 2 decades.
And of course, we're also joined by R.W. Harty here. All right, how am I supposed to say?
Right. This is the last great hope for wrestling, Joey Corman.
All right, the last great hope for wrestling, Joey Corman. I was going to call you the loose cannon.
Well, yeah, I've been called a lot worse, so that'll work. We can do that. That'll work. Loose cannon, last great hope for pro wrestling, or Joey Corman.
Because I was like, Pillman must have learned all his stuff from you back when he was still alive. Because you're very entertaining on Facebook.
Well, when Pillman, myself, the Dream Machine, and Bob Root were traveling around Florida, I did show him a thing or two about the wrestling business and about life, so to speak.
Now, I didn't get a chance to introduce you, R.W. Harty. We were talking a little bit before we went on. You're actually from up in the Springfield area, but you're also down here training as well.
Yeah, I live in Battlefield, Missouri, and then I come here on Tuesday nights to train. I've been coming here for 2 years now. I've been in the ring since last August, so for about 7 months now. I've had at this point, about 20 matches.
And now, you mentioned earlier, you've been wrestling for a while. What kind of got you into wrestling?
Fan growing up, man. I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. So I was in Crockett territory, and I got to go back and forth to Texas, which the world-class stuff in UWF coming out of Louisiana was awesome. So I was fortunate enough to be able to be around when the territories were still thriving and seeing a lot of different wrestling from all over the country. And I wasn't really a sports fan, but for some reason, something about wrestling just grabbed me.
And one thing that gets asked to a lot of people is, what got you into wrestling, or what do you remember as a kid that got you in? And like a lot of people, my answer is, I don't know. I was a small kid, and I remember I knew who Hulk Hogan was, but we only had one channel growing up on the farm. Wrestling wasn't on it, but I remember Hulk Hogan. I remember having the big rubber LJN figure, and I remember the cartoon, but I can't remember what specifically gravitated me towards it. But I was born in 1982, so I was like the perfect demographic that Hulkamania was built off of, because WrestleMania was about 85, and then the wrestling boom was at the end of the 80s. So before I knew it, I was just infatuated with this, and every time my mom would go grocery shopping, my babysitter was the magazine rack at the grocery aisle, and at that point there was about 5 different magazines that were wrestling to choose from. So I was reading the magazines. If I went into town at my grandma's, she had cable, so I might catch an episode of Superstars on TV and everything, and then it just built from there. And then I started renting pay-per-views from the video store back in the old VHS days and everything, and at that point I've done rented everything on the shelf after a year or two, and I was fanatical about it, and I just grew up into it.
So we got a WWF guy that was inspired. You were inspired more by the Crockett era. Growing up, I know you've said Hogan was someone who really got you into, watching wrestling. Who was the wrestler that really inspired you growing up?
The first guy that really grabbed my attention was Kabuki. And then after that, I started leaning more towards Ric Flair and the Horsemen. And I was always more of a fan of that side of the track, so to speak. Those guys seem more flamboyant and just a little more entertaining, so to speak.
So you're a fan of heels?
Really, yeah, pretty much. And then, of course, there were the guys that just had something about me, that grabbed you, like Bruiser Brody, Abdullah the Butcher. Later on, guys like the Ultimate Warrior and stuff. There's just something about them that sucked you in, the it factor that everyone talks about that you can't explain. You have it or you don't. So, yeah.
One thing as far as your favorite wrestler that I've learned is the older you get, that's what can kind of change you. I said, as a little kid, it was Hulk Hogan. Got a little bit older, and I'm like, well, I like Randy Savage. Got a little bit older, and I'm like, I like these guys that are bad and they're tough. And I became like this massive, ravishing Rick Rude fan, which gravitated me towards the heels and the model Rick Martel. And then, tag team wrestling in the early 90s was huge. You had guys like Demolition and the Legion of Doom, and these were these bad guys that were just muscular, and they were brawlers and they were fighters. That appealed to me. Then, naturally, he mentioned Ric Flair. What teenage guy that likes to go out and party and get girls wouldn't love Ric Flair? That's the epitome of what every guy really wants to be, whether they admit it or not.
Well, every woman wanted him, every man wanted to be him, that's Nate. But what's it like, you guys have been, wrestling for a bit. When you're training and going through all this training, what's stuff that you guys kind of work on when you're in here training?
A lot of this stuff is basically building your cardio, man. There's a difference between being in cardiovascular shape and being in ring shape. There's a big difference. There's a lot of guys that can go out and run a mile or run 5 miles or whatnot, but you get them in the ring for 10 minutes and, they're gassed and they can't perform, and that's the thing. That's what we generally work on here, or me, myself. I get in here and I try to work on being ring shape and timing. Little things that if you're out of the ring for a while, you'll start to get rusty on these little bitty things that people tend to overlook that are some of the most important parts of wrestling and the fundamental stuff that everything's built on. They're too flashy. They're doing all this other, there's filler. But we need these fundamentals to be solid, and that's what we're trying to do here at Mid-States Wrestling. We're trying to get the kids into the fundamental part of wrestling, and then we'll branch them out into the flippity-flop stuff that, everybody's entertained by and wants to do. It says wrestling still. It has always said wrestling, so you can always go back to wrestling, and you won't be wrong.
Well, I noticed while we were doing the interview, I actually could kind of hear you guys were talking about selling a little bit over there, using some ring psychology. Kind of tell us, what is ring psychology?
Ring psychology is ultimately kind of putting yourself in that situation and understanding why we were doing what we were doing. So if you get slammed, you just got slammed. Now apply that to real life. Well, what would you do? Naturally, it hurts, right? You're going to hold your head. You're going to hold your back. The guy that did it to you, he just got a big move over on you. He should be happy. He should be ready to go in for the kill. It's kind of understanding the business of...
You could have answered it.
Here, hang on. Yeah, I was like...
That could be WWE call.
Jason, give me the phone.
But I know, Joey, you were talking about selling. You guys were talking about psychology and selling, too.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most overlooked...
I gave you a minute so you could answer it.
It's one of the most overlooked fundamentals of professional wrestling. There's a story and there's a reason that you do things. Just like any good movie, they have, there's story arcs and things that grab your attention and things that there's lulls in the action. There's time to build drama, and that's what the art of wrestling is, the psychology and the selling. Without that, you really don't have a story. You really just have a collection of... The bell rings, you have a collection of moves, and then the bell rings again. So what?
I've had a veteran that wrestled around Memphis the majority of his life, and he actually was part of OVW, which was a WWE developmental territory, and Power Pro Wrestling, which was a WWE developmental territory, Derek King. And he even told me, he's like, the match and the moves is 100% secondary. I don't care about that. Tell me a story. If you do that, then you're on the right track. So you can come here and you can drill your moves because you have to have that, and you can learn your stuff and you have to have that, and you can get into shape. All that you have to have before you even belong in the ring. But then once you're there, now it's time to direct a story between you and another guy or a few people, depending on the type of match and everything. Tell the story to the fans and leave them wanting more whenever it's all said and done. And give them a definitive ending. They might not like the ending. Sometimes the bad guys win, right? But at least give them a definitive ending to the story.
I know when we said sometimes the bad guy wins, you had a little smile on that.
Well, like we all like to live in fairy tale land, but you have to live in reality sometimes. Sometimes the bad guys win. And it seems like most of the time that's what happens these days, but, I'm just going along with the story.
One thing that's an ever constant in wrestling is, good things can happen to good people, but sometimes bad things happen to good people, and sometimes good things happen to bad people, and that's just something in wrestling you just have to accept as the reality of the story.
Well, that's why we love the world of professional wrestling, and really enjoyed watching you guys work out and the psychology you were teaching and talking about selling and getting back to basics, and looking forward to watching you guys at an MSW event soon or some event out there, and definitely going to follow you on Facebook. I'll tell you, if you want to know opinions on everything, just follow Joey Corman. So
I'm on Twitter. That's at R.W. Harty, Harty.
Thanks a lot.